Physician, activist, and the Green Party's presidential candidate, she has been a longstanding advocate for healthcare, climate, and human justice, and she has been one of the most outspoken national figures on Palestine. She's consistently called for the end of violence in Gaza and the dignity of the Palestinian people. And with today's age, with youth coming together to demand accountability and to fight for Palestine, Dr. Stein's message is really resonating with the youth movement and peace, solidarity, and justice. And on behalf of SJP, I really want to thank you guys once again for being here, and please give a warm welcome for Dr. Jill Stein.
Give us just a minute here while we... And yes, it's such an honor to be here. And I want to give a big thank you to Lean and to everyone at Students for Justice in Palestine. You guys are a total inspiration. Let's see, where is that feedback coming from? Let me try it from over here. So you guys are a total inspiration, and give yourselves a round of applause, please. Okay. Thank you. I'm just going to check and make sure we're not getting a little feedback. All right, good. Okay, all right. Let me know if it starts getting too echoey. But it's really exciting to be here, and it's just exciting to know that even here in Arkansas, that here too, that Students for Justice in Palestine is alive and well and going strong, and you guys are a complete inspiration. If you can do it here, it can be done anywhere. So we are standing up for justice for Palestine and justice for all of us. So let me talk through a few slides here. And I want to just start off with this concept that we do in fact have the power to shut down the genocide in Palestine, in Gaza, but as you know, it's growing beyond Gaza right now, so it's really all of Palestine and beyond. What we're seeing in Gaza is really a microcosm of the abuses of empire. As Ronald Reagan's Secretary of Defense, Caspar Weinberger, said back in the 1980s, Israel is the unsinkable battleship for the United States in the Middle East, safeguarding the U.S. outpost, a military outpost, control over trade routes, control over oil and gas supplies. And what's happening in Gaza is really a microcosm of the abuses of empire, which go way beyond Gaza. But if we allow the destruction of international law and human rights to take place in Gaza, we're basically giving free rein to the abuses of empire, both by Israel as the proxy of the United States and the United States itself. So it's really important that we stand up for international law and human rights. It's really the future of all of us, as well as the future of the people of Palestine, that is at risk right now. But the good news is that for all the work that has been done, largely by the youth movement in the United States and around the world, we have prevailed, and you have prevailed, and you have transformed public opinion. When this genocide broke out full bore in the United States, the majority opinion was with Israel. You didn't question Israel. And over the course, really, of the next year, we saw an absolutely astounding flip-flop in public sentiment. Public sentiment that really had not budged for decades, really, in spite of this smoldering ethnic cleansing that had been going on since before even the founding of the State of Israel, since the beginning of the migration into historic Palestine, claiming that this was a land without a people and a people without a land. I'm sure you're all familiar with that saying, which was so false, but that was what was being sold to the American public, to Jews around the world who were taught that Zionism is the way forward, that Zionism is the reality, that Zionism was a moral force, you know, and then the reality was, no, it was exactly the opposite. And also, the reality is that Zionism is not Judaism. They are two very different things. And people of Jewish background, like myself, are among those who are most engaged in helping to educate the public, to clarify that Zionism is not Judaism. In fact, the argument can be made that, in fact, it is the opposite of Judaism. It is the opposite of Jewish values, and it reflects anti-Semitism. Its origins were in an anti-Semitic moment and movement, and it, in fact, encourages anti-Semitism and creates enormous hostility and resentment towards Jews, whereas in reality, most Jews I know are vehemently opposed to the genocide that Israel is conducting. So we have truth on our side, we have the moral high ground, and it turns out we also now have public opinion on our side. There are also some very critical specific mechanisms right now, some of which you may not have heard of, that I'm going to talk about today. And I'm going to go through a lot of stuff quickly because there's a lot to cover and I want to leave a lot of time for us to have discussion. But the basic idea here is that we do, in fact, have the power. We have the numbers, we've got the moral high ground, and we have the mechanisms for ending the genocide. And ending it actually rather quickly. And I'll explain how we can do that. Also, the genocide in Gaza is a microcosm, as I mentioned, of a much bigger situation. This situation in which empire is at war with humanity. Empire which is devouring half of our congressional budget, half of our discretionary dollars here in this country are being spent murdering children by the tens of thousands and utterly destroying buildings and shelter and health care and farmland and food. Our dollars are being spent to destroy that, leaving people in this country, especially vulnerable people, really up a creek. And we're seeing that now, especially as some, depending on the estimate you look at, whether it was 20-some billion or 38 billion, that's the kind of upper estimate of what has been spent just in the last 2 years conducting this genocide. Yet at the same time, our government, and I don't mean our government because I feel like it doesn't belong to us, the government inflicted on us by economic and political elites is squandering our tax dollars on military outrage, military abuses above all. And we deserve to stand up and stop it. And if there's anything I want to communicate tonight, it's that in fact we do have power. One person who said this really beautifully is the poet Alice Walker. Does that name ring a bell? Novelist, poet. She was one of the early flotilla members 15 years ago, something like that. And what she said that really sticks with me is this: the biggest way people give up power is by not knowing we have it to start with. We have a lot of power, and I'm going to go through some of the evidence for that here as we rapid fire go through a bunch of slides here. To make that point, we do have the power. As Malcolm X said, we're not outnumbered, we're just out-organized. And the bottom line is for us to have the courage of our convictions. And who's had absolutely astounding courage that has been an inspiration to the world? It is Students for Justice in Palestine and the likes among youth movements across the world who have stood up because of your deep conviction. And I think if anyone deserves credit, it is the youth movement that really has changed public opinion here. So give yourselves a round of applause, because you're doing exactly what we need to keep doing. So just some other examples of where youth have been leading the charge. This was in the civil rights movement. Who is it that decided, do I have a pointer here? I'm not sure if I do. Let's see. I'm not seeing it. But on the upper left there, those were 4 college students in Greensboro, North Carolina in 1960 who decided to do a sit-in at a lunch counter. There were 4 of them on day 1. They didn't get served, they didn't get arrested, they were prepared to be arrested because they really believed in what they were doing. They weren't arrested, but they weren't served, and they came back the next day. But word had gotten out, and the next day there were 15 of them, and then the next day there were hundreds of them, and the next day there were thousands of them. And it's just a sign of how courage is contagious, and when you're doing the right thing and it's the right time, people are going to join you. Often you don't know if it's the right time, but you have to go ahead and do it anyhow, and then you're going to find out if it's the right time. Because we are following the moral course of the universe, and you don't know exactly when the universe is going to bend towards justice, but you have to stand up and try to bend it. And that is what Students for Justice in Palestine have been doing. That's what youth have been doing throughout, not just modern history, as far back as it goes. The picture on the right, upper right, was one of the buses from Freedom Summer. After the lunch counter sit-ins got started, then you had students that were going to register voters, to register African Americans who were being kept away from the polls, and they began Freedom Summer, which was, again, really productive. On the left, you see the uprising in France in 1968, which was started again by students who were protesting political repression at the school and also the underfunding of higher education. And what students began then became a society-wide rebellion, and actually a general strike that shut down the economy in France. It nearly toppled the government. But it's like students had the courage. It's like the story of the emperor's new clothes. When the emperor didn't have any clothes, who was it that stood up and called it like it is? It was some young kid who didn't know any better, who stood up and told truth to power. That happened in Paris in '68. This is, happening all over the world. These are just a few instances. And then on the right is Nelson Mandela as a young man, just after he had joined the African National Congress, the ANC. He was in his early 20s at the time, and he actually co-founded the Youth League of the ANC. And again, this was all happening at the, with the push from youth. And then I'm going to zoom through some photos here of how youth have been leading the charge for justice in Palestine. And it really, this is the stuff that transformed public opinion, because it was done with such courage and integrity and such beautiful art and poetry that it just captured the spirit and the heart of people the world over. This was a photo article, I think, from The Guardian, I believe, so the credits are in here somewhere. Just really fabulous photos. This is from the University of California. These are some of the encampments where many students were, really took it on the chin for daring to stand up. And I know myself, from having been at many of these encampments, how hard the crackdown was, how incredibly brutal it was, and the courage that young people showed to do it and keep doing it again, and not to fight back, and to be utterly peaceful throughout. Peaceful and multi-religious and very respectful. One of the very first encampments took place at Columbia And what was one of the first things they did? They held a public Seder. So there was a celebration, far from being anti-Semitic. This was really the height of respect for all religions, Judaism and all religions. This was in Mexico. Let's see, where did we go here? Finland. I'm just going to run through these rapid fire. This was Oxford University, San Diego, University of California, Berlin, University of Chicago, Texas, and so on. So this actually transformed public opinion. And having started off with the public largely supporting Israel's assault on Palestine, within several months, actually, public opinion began to really shift, and now twice as many Americans disapprove as approve. It's 60-some% as opposed to 30-some%. So it's not like it's close, it's overwhelming. In addition, the American public now, by majority, supports not only a military boycott of Israel and its genocidal government, but also an economic boycott, which would have been absolutely unheard of, some years ago. A majority of Americans now, or I should say more Americans now, sympathize with Palestinians over Israelis. And at the international level, the support for Gaza is even stronger. There was a vote in the United Nations in the General Assembly, not the Security Council, and I'm going to come back to this later, but the Security Council is what is basically ruled by the US and its allies. And they have a veto. The 5 permanent members of the Security Council have a veto, so they basically control what the majority wants to do. There are some, I think it's 190 nations that are currently represented in the United Nations General Assembly. The General Assembly is like the People's House. That's where one country, one vote. Everybody has the same vote, unlike the Security Council. And the General Assembly took a vote about a year ago, and what they decided was that Israel had to comply with the International Court of Justice, which said what? It said, end the apartheid, end the ethnic cleansing, end the occupation. And that means dismantling the settlements, which violate the basic rights of Palestinians. So it was a very principled ruling on the part of the International Court of Justice, and then the United Nations voted on that, and they voted to give Israel 1 year to comply with that. And that vote was not close. It wasn't just a majority. It wasn't just a supermajority. It was 90%. By 90%, the nations of the world say this genocide has to stop and Israel has to respect international law. Now, those who've been watching the behavior of Israel know that it does not abide by international law or human rights. And we're going to come back to what can you do when you have an absolute outlaw that is violating not only the rights of Palestinians, but Lebanon and Syria and other countries as well, and really constitutes a threat, the Yemenis as well, constitutes a threat to the whole international order. So I'm going to come back. So the big but here is that our leaders, our so-called leaders, are working for AIPAC, and they're working for war profiteers in a political system where money rules the day, where political policies are basically bought and paid for by lobbyists and campaign contributions. So how can we stop this genocide when the United States is a full partner in this genocide, is providing 80% of the weapons, provides diplomatic cover? How do the people of the world and the people of this country compel our leaders to actually respect what it is that we the people insist on, that international law calls for? So this is a quick summary of how we change that. Most of these are familiar to you. Boycotts and embargoes, divestment, sanctions, labor actions, I'm going to say a few words about, because these are kind of new on the scene and we haven't heard much about them here, but they're very powerful. A general strike. Did anybody hear about the general strike in Italy that took place last month? There were 2 of them. They were led, in fact, by one of the grassroots labor unions, labor unions that are sort of people-powered. They are not top-down. They're not owned by the political elites or the big money interests. These are labor unions the way they're supposed to be, representing everyday people. One of those unions, called USB, I won't say the name in Italian, they helped lead this, and they basically shut down the ports because they include not only the port workers, they include the transportation workers, healthcare workers, public sector workers, students, people in tenants unions. They're a very convergent, large union, and they were out in the street to the tune of 1 or 2 million people, and they basically shut down the economy. If you look at the videos of this, people were happy to participate. People were okay about being held up in traffic and all the rest, because they really, people are upset about this genocide. So if you're going to get held up in traffic for a few hours, is that too big a price to pay? People didn't think so. And so there's another strike action coming up that I'll tell you more about on the 28th, which happens to be Black Friday, which opens up a lot of possibilities. So the Italian unions are leading the strike on that day. They're also reaching out to work with the other unions that control all the other ports around the Mediterranean. So they could very effectively shut down the flow of weapons, and they could shut down the whole economy, which is what they did on that day of a general strike. They are aiming to basically install a blockade against the shipment of these weapons, which actually violate international law, which the European Union countries are all signed on to. So the workers there say that I will be violating the law if I load these weapons, in these tanks and these missiles and these bombs. So they are going strong, and their example is extremely exciting and inspiring, and it really changes the terms of the debate here, because then it's not just a debate, it's also the capacity to exercise civil disobedience, to withdraw our labor, to withdraw our dollars from an economy that's committing genocide on our dime and on our consciences. So, exciting things ahead. And then I want to talk also about uniting for peace. Is that a term anybody's heard of? It has gotten very little press here. If you've heard about this, that's really great. Uniting for Peace is a mechanism that's used by the UN, not in the Security Council, where the Big Five basically rule the day, but in the People's House, in the General Assembly. So they have a mechanism called Uniting for Peace, where they can bypass the Security Council. They can decide actually to send a protection force into Gaza and into Palestine, a protection force in order to open up the routes of aid delivery and to protect Palestinian lives, also to implement a weapons embargo broadly and compel nations to participate in that, and also economic sanctions. So this is kind of like a complete package to shut down the genocide. But what's really different here is that it actually sends in a protection force. You may have heard about this force that Donald Trump and France and Saudi Arabia are trying to send in, a so-called stabilization force. What will it stabilize? It will stabilize the occupation. It will stabilize the denial of human rights to Palestinians. It will stabilize settlements and the theft of Palestinian land. So The Uniting for Peace, what should I say? The pre-decision about that was a vote taken 1 year ago that said, Israel, you have 1 year. So that put everybody on notice that there was going to be a proposal coming up around now. And that may very well be why it is that suddenly there's a flood of proposals that are attempting to kind of overwhelm this actual Uniting for Peace proposal. A flood of Trojan horse proposals that pretend that they are going to stabilize the situation, that they're going to help the people of Palestine. But actually what they do is hold the people of Palestine down where they are, and they protect the security of Israel. That's very much what the language of the Trump resolution is all about. It's about protecting Israel. It's about disarming Hamas. And according to international law, this isn't my belief, this is what international law says, people that are occupied have a right to resist their occupation. Occupation is essentially a slow brewing war. So, it's no secret Hamas is not going to disarm. It's no secret that Donald Trump's peace plan is not about peace. It's a real estate investment plan that was very specifically revealed on some national interview, it might have been CBS, where Donald Trump's son-in-law and Witkoff, his chief negotiator, basically said as much. They said the quiet part out loud, that this plan has been in the works. This is a master plan in which Donald Trump's son-in-law has been the major investor. So this is a real estate investment plan disguised as a peace plan. Did anybody out there think that the Trump plan was a real peace plan? No. Is that pretty much what you've heard 24/7? The mainstream media propaganda is all about pushing that plan, but I think people now really see, has it ended the genocide?
No.
Has it ended the starvation?
No.
Not one bit. Has it ended the destruction of healthcare resources? Has it enabled healthcare for 20,000 severely disabled children now? Or the tens of thousands of others who, have been killed and are under the rubble? It's so ironic because Israel denies the entry of equipment to excavate the dead bodies. Israel won't allow the equipment to come in. Turkey wanted to send in that equipment. Israel won't allow it. And then they declare that a violation of the ceasefire when the deceased Israeli soldiers are not returned to Israel. They declare that a violation, but it's a violation because Israel would not allow the excavating equipment to be brought in. This is typical for how Israel handles a ceasefire or any kind of peace deal. In fact, their usual approach to peace negotiations is to assassinate the negotiators. And that's what they've done over and over again. You can look, for example, to Lebanon, where a ceasefire was declared a year ago. The numbers say that Israel has violated that ceasefire 4,000 times in the course of a year. And we see the same thing going on right now with the supposed ceasefire. It's like a joke that the media says the ceasefire holds. It's just interrupted. Well, how often is it interrupted? Like a few times a day, it's interrupted, and still they say the ceasefire holds. It's nonsense, and I think the public is no longer buying it, which is why Trump is not able to ram his proposal through the Security Council. They're trying to do that in order to lock out the Uniting for Peace proposal to send a protection force to Gaza. So the Trump plan is in a complete meltdown, which creates an opening now for the Uniting for Peace proposal. And we'll talk a little bit more about how that's moving forward and how you can help make that happen. Mask Off Mursk, are you familiar with that? That is a project of the Palestinian Youth Movement, PYM. It's an effort to hold one particular corporation that ships a lot of military parts, to hold them accountable by exposing what they do. The labor movement in the United States has been absolutely frozen, has not been willing to even call it a genocide, let alone participate in the weapons boycotts. And are you familiar with Chris Smalls in the right side of he's on your left, okay, sorry, of the projection there. Chris Smalls founded the Amazon Workers Union. He helped workers unionize at Amazon to fight very abusive working conditions. Well, he also then went on the flotilla saying that if we defend workers in this country, we've got to defend working people everywhere. And he went on one of the recent flotillas and was singled out and abused as the only African American on the crew, and was tortured and held in solitary confinement and not fed and all that, and he wasn't allowed to take the plane back when they finally released the other prisoners. So at any rate, he's now very involved, having experienced Israeli detention firsthand. He's now very involved in trying to organize the labor movement as someone who has been respected as a labor leader. He's now very involved in a campaign to get the AFL-CIO, the largest labor union umbrella in the United States, to take a stand that this is genocide and to support the boycotts and the worker shutdowns to stop sending the weapons. It's a tall order to get the AFL-CIO on board here, but it's really great that he's begun to do that, and a lot of people are mobilizing behind him. This is one of the flyers for that movement, and the slogan is, "The genocide won't stop till the weapons stop flowing." The main reason I'm showing it here is to just point out that first red line, the International Day of Action for Palestine. This is, again, that day when Italy is beginning a general strike. That's on the 28th of November, just a date to keep in mind. And there's a website where you can find out more. There's an effort for people to gather at AFL-CIO headquarters around the country in order to support the workers who are calling for